Living Power with Dan Hurst.
Answered him, he wore a garment of hair with a belt of leather around his waist, and he said, "It is Elijah the Tishbite." Now remember what in our passage for today, back in verse 21, they said, "Who are you? Are you Elijah?" They put two and two together. The reason is because they believed that Elijah would return as the forerunner to the Messiah. Here's John saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And now here he is dressed up in this camel skin, which they understood was the dress of a prophet. And they said, "Are you Elijah? You're saying the kingdom is at hand. Are you Elijah?" They were basing that on Old Testament prophecy from Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, that says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day the Lord comes." So they knew their scriptures, and they knew that Elijah would be this forerunner for the great and awful day of the Lord. So they were expecting Elijah to show up as a precursor to the Messiah. And so that's why they asked him, "Are you Elijah?" And his response was, "I am not," which had to totally confuse them. Wait a minute, you're saying the kingdom is at hand, you're dressed like Elijah, you act like Elijah, how can this be? It had to be terribly confusing to them. And they said they were remembering what he was saying. "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." They understood what he was saying, because this is what the prophet would be proclaiming before the Messiah showed up. But it was supposed to be Elijah. By the way, they were going to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, that says, "A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight the desert a highway, in the desert a highway for our God." They understood that prophecy, that Elijah would be the one who comes as a precursor to the Messiah, to introduce the Messiah to the world and warn everybody that the Messiah has arrived. Now, the thing that was so amazing to them was that there would be this guy who fit the description of Elijah, was saying that the kingdom of heaven was at hand, and was proclaiming that he was the voice in the desert, saying those things. And that just had to capture them, and they had to wonder what in the world is going on. Now, the interesting thing about that is that during that time, there was a sect of the Jews called the Essenes. There were Sadducees, there were Pharisees, and there were Essenes, and actually there were a few others, but those were the three main. We never really hear about the Essenes. We hear about the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Essenes aren't ever really mentioned by the name in the scriptures, and the reason is pretty simple. They didn't call themselves Essenes. That's what other people referred to them as. And they also had this theme. This was their theme. They followed this theme. It is our job to be in the wilderness, preparing a way for the Lord, to make straight a desert and the highway for our God. That was their theme. They followed that. They were a very strict sect.